Hello class, and welcome to the video for Chapter 9 Layout Properties. So we are going to be looking at here Chapter 9 in your textbook, Foundations of Web Design by Thomas Michaud. And just a few reminders here before we get started. Make sure you are watching the video and make sure you're doing it. I don't care if you speed it up a little bit, but I wouldn't skip ahead. Reason being that when you skip ahead and you just follow the video and do what it says but not listen to what I'm saying, you're really shortchanging yourself, because you're going to have your projects here coming up, specifically the midterm projects, so the halfway through the year one, that you're going to need to apply the information you're learning. And if you're skipping past it, it's going to be much more difficult for you to complete the assignment. So make sure you're following along with the video, listening to what's being said, watching, and also follow along with your textbook, because there's pictures and images that I refer to, and it'll help you kind of remember the information as well. So with that being said, let's go ahead and get started. Now, to control the position, behavior, and visibility of the document's box elements, you'll use the float, position, and display properties. So the thing is, you want to remember with the box element review is CSS sees each HTML element as a box, and these boxes will be either block level boxes or inline boxes. Block elements. Block level elements are those elements of an HTML document that are formatted visually as blocks, so header 1, div, paragraph, table, etc. They begin on new lines. If no width set, they will expand naturally to fill the parent containers. While they can contain inline level elements, some can contain other block elements as well. And it shows an example of that. You got header 1 and then paragraph, and then they show it in figure 9.1. Now, inline level elements are contained within block level elements and do not begin a new line. They may contain only data and other inline elements, and it shows emphasis, strong, span, etc. And it shows how it looks inside of figure 9.2. So this is part of why you want to look at the book. Now, wildcard box, replace elements. Replace elements are HTML elements that have a predetermined width and height without the benefit of CSS. Their appearance and dimensions are defined by an external resource. Like inline elements, they can be within other block elements. Like block level elements, they can stand on their own. And then you see figure 9.3 shows an example of that. So let's look at float. You're probably familiar with magazines, books, and other printed material that may have images on a page and text flowing around them. The designer places the images in the layout and sets the image to allow the boxes containing text to wrap around them. It shows an example of that in figure 9.4. In web design, you can do something similar by using CSS float property to allow blocks of text to float around your images, and it shows that being used in figure 9.5. The float property specifies whether or not a block level element should float, and if so, whether it should float to the left, to the right, or not at all. A floating element is shifted to the left or to the right as far as it can go, and non-floating content in the normal flow will flow around it on the opposite side. Now it says here, if you view the 01float.html document in your browser, so that's our clue to open it up, but you'll notice I actually opened up the CSS file related to it, so float image CSS, and I'm actually going to do a browser preview, so menu button and then browser preview right over here, and I'm going to have it go and in the browser preview show me the HTML file they're talking about. So I'm picking float 01float.html as my file to preview. I click open, and then remember selection for this file and preview it. And there you can see it's showing up my HTML file. I'll zoom over on this side a little bit more. Now before I do that though, notice that they have some example code at the top you don't want to touch, because it's going to mess up the file and it won't work correctly for our exercise. So don't touch this part up here. You actually want to come down here and type when we get to that part a little bit later, and I'll zoom in a bit more for you. Alright. So it shows here the picture of the HTML file we're looking at, and then gives an example of it in figure 9.6a and 9.6b of how it looks HTML-wise. Now it talks about on the next page print and web are different, which is very true. You'll notice there's a stacked box order. Elements are at the beginning of the source order will appear above elements later in the source order. So basically the earlier in the text file it appears, the HTML file, the higher up on the order it's going to be. And then remember, it says containing boxes. Remember, there are boxes within boxes within boxes. That's how HTML works. And then talking about responsive design, this is just a brief overview here, is an important concept that you'll need to learn before long. It is an approach, responsive design, aimed at crafting sites to provide an optimal viewing experience across a wide range of devices, enabling easy reading and navigation with a minimum of resizing, panning, and scrolling. While the basics of responsive design will be covered in Chapter 10, so next chapter, it's beyond the scope of this book to cover the topic in depth. Again, this is a beginner introduction course. Refer to the website for additional resources. Alright, so we're going to first look at float none. So by default, elements did not have a float property applied. So in floatimage.css, which is the file I already have opened here, as you can see, it says add the following rule. And you can see in your textbook, we're adding image, curly bracket, and then float none. I'm going to save it. Now the none value is only needed when you want to remove a float value from an element that already has or inherited a float value of right, left, or inherit. When would such an opportunity arise? Responsive web design layouts use the none value to remove a float from an image or an element to create a single column layout. And so you can see example of in figure 9.7. So it didn't really make a difference because nothing had been told to float yet. Now to float the first image element within the div class main box to the left, simply use the class selector for the class attribute value of main and descendant selector for image. So I'm going to click here in front of image, type in period, main, space, and then for float, I'm actually going to change it to left. And then I'm going to save it. Now you can see a picture of it in your textbook, figure 9.8. After I save the document, it refreshes my browser preview here, and it changed it. It made the element float and changed how the text is arranging around it. So you notice the box collapses to the height of the content since it ignores the floated element. So see how it's collapsed here? It's shorter than this here element. And still expanding to the width of the parent element. And the parent element, of course, is this box outside of it. The content in the next box below the floated image also moves up to the content. You can see right here. H2 flows to the right of the image. So now let's float the second image element in the div class sidebar to the right. So we have our div class main. Now we're dealing with another div class. So period sidebar is what they call it, image, curly bracket, and then I'm typing in float, right, semicolon, and save. And you can see it makes a float over here. So this box I'm dealing with right here, this image is a sidebar, and this is my main div here, image. And one's floated to the left, one's floated to the right. Now, dealing with float inherit, the inherit value specifies that the value of float property should be inherited from the parent element. So now, float the parent main element left, so the child image element can inherit its value. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click in front of this one, push enter twice, and then type in main, curly bracket, enter, float left width 620 pixels. Don't put any spaces between the number and, of course, your measurement. So pixels, and then down here for main image, I need to change it from left to inherit. If I can type it right, and save. Now you can see it's changed it. It put the main div element here. So when you float the containing div class main box element, the image child element inherits the parent element's float value of left. So over here to the left. The sibling div class sidebar box element ignores both floated box elements and extends up to the reach the containing box element div class primary, which is not floated. So primary right here, and then sidebar and main. Alright, now moving on to step 9.1.5. Now add another rule for the sidebar class selector and float it to the right with a width of 290 pixels. So I need to put it not for just the image, but actually for the sidebar itself. Float right width 290 pixels. And I'm going to save it. And now you can see it's changed and moved it to look like this. When all the nested elements within the contained div class primary are floated, the containing element collapses as the nested boxes are no longer in the flow of the containing element, and the div class footer fills the space behind the two floated divs with the content flowing to the left of the right floated box. And you can see how that looks. So this is my footer actually right here, the green, and now it's reaching all the way up because we floated these two. And you can see that in figure 9.1.3. Alright, the next objectives will be to move the div class footer below both floated divs and to uncollapse the containing div class primary box. So now we're going to clear floats, and you can see in our HTML, or excuse me, our CSS file, it has the example right here for where we should type it. So I'm going to click down here in row 39 on my file. It may be different on yours, and we'll get started. To allow the div class footer to clear the left floated box element, simply write the rule footer, curly bracket, and then enter clear left semicolon, and I save it. And you notice it clears this left element right here. The footer box now clears any floated elements that would be on its left side, creating space between the two elements once again. To make the footer clear, the right floated div, so over here, materials, change the clear value from left to right. So I'm just going to double click on my word left, change it to right, and save it. And now you can see it clears the right floated element, the sidebar. Since the sidebar div on the right is longer, the footer div moves below both the right and left footed divs above it. However, what if the div class main box added more content and became longer than the div class sidebar? And you can see figure 9.16 to understand this concept. What we would need to do is, it's saying basically this one would become much longer and go down further. What we would want to do is for clear, change it from right to both. And that's actually our next step. And see, it doesn't change visually, but now, it doesn't matter what side gets longer, it will automatically make sure it stays past both of them. So now the footer is now set to clear any floated box above in the future. Now fixing the collapse. There are a few methods to uncollapse a parent container of floated elements. Each has its own positives and negatives, and this book will discuss two of them. Now the clear fix method, which is what we're talking about, uses the pseudo element after with a class selector to place an empty content after the nested elements. Display it as a block level element and clear both left and right floated elements. And we're going to see what this all means here. Now I need to go a little bit further down my CSS file, so I'm in row 46 under the clear fix method and group and after. So click under that and be ready to go. Most designers add a class name to the containing elements class attribute, signifying it contains a group of elements, which may or may not be floated. So anytime you have a group of nested elements, you could apply a clear fix rule to prevent any box collapse. So, step 9.1.10, in the HTML, we'll use the opening div class primary group tag that has the necessary group class applied. So in your CSS, add the following rule. So they already added in the group and stuff, so we're typing group after curly bracket, and I type enter, and I need to type in content, quotation mark, space, and I push the right arrow to go after it, semicolon, and enter, display, block, clear, both, and then we save it. And now you notice it added in this for the clear fix method right here, added in that box that you can now see. Now it goes through here in the next few examples of how to clear fix for older browsers. We're not going to worry about going over that because most of the time you're not going to be dealing with the browsers that they're talking about. Now, overflow clear, step 9.1.11. Another method is to use the overflow method, and so I have to go further down my HTML file down to the last row. Overflow method property on the containing parent element. So we're going to add in here, it says for our rule we need to add in period primary, curly bracket, enter, and then overflow, auto, and then width 100%, semicolon, and save. If the containing element's overflow is set to auto or hidden, it will expand to include the floated boxes. And so basically you can see what it would do is it would stretch this box down right here that we already did. but this is just a different option. Now, while on the topic of overflow, it's a good idea to look at a few additional examples that work with scrolling and hidden content. And so we're going to look at that.